All right, thank you, and good morning, everybody. So we're here to talk about re-engagement, and in thinking about this, it occurred to me that of all of the relatively new vocabulary that the marketing industry has created in the last 5 years, re-engagement might be the easiest term to understand, especially for someone who's not in this space. And that's because I think it has similar meaning in a lot of other contexts. When we think about nations meeting together around and re-engaging one another around a negotiating table, we call it diplomacy. And armies re-engage one another on the battlefield. Certainly romance and old flames can re-engage and rekindle relationships. And anyone who's a baseball fan and goes back a ways remembers well the late owner of the New York Yankees, George Steinbrenner, re-engaging and engaging former manager Billy Martin, hiring and firing him 5 times from the mid-1970s through the 80s. But we're here to talk about the mobile flavor of re-engagement, which I think in concept is also pretty similar to understand, but in practice has a lot of its challenges. And to help me talk about those challenges and solutions, we have a panel here that I think knows as much as can be known about this topic. And so let's get underway. And what I'll do to start is just have each one of you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your company. And Brian, why don't we begin with you?
Great. Yeah, my name is Brian Melkerson. I came to Twitter via the Tap Commerce acquisition about a year ago today. I lead mobile performance marketing on the East Coast at Twitter. And the Tap Commerce platform was specifically built to help marketers bring back users via advertising in third-party apps. And we're really excited to bring that to Twitter as part of their overall mobile production suite.
My name is Adam Foroughi, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Applovin. We've been one of the larger mobile marketing platforms for the last few years. We help app developers typically find new customers, but we also help app developers re-engage them at times.
Cool. Hi, my name is David Phillipson. I'm the Managing Director of Mobile Solutions at Criteo. Prior to that, I was actually one of the founders of AdX Tracking, which some of you may know was one of the early players in app tracking and analytics. So for a long time, I was actually one of the competitors to Tune. We joined Criteo through an acquisition in July 2013. About 6 months ago, we actually made the strategic decision to focus all of my team's resources on our core proposition at Criteo, which is re-engagement and retargeting. So we actually sunsetted the AdX business, which allowed us to focus on partnerships with Tune, as opposed to competing with them. So this is my first Postback. I think it's fair to say I probably wouldn't have been welcome here this time last year, but now we're partnering with these guys, and we've handed over a lot of our customers to them. So it's great to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. And just quickly about Ampush. Ampush is one of only a handful of companies in the world that has been recognized for its team and technology by Facebook and Twitter, Pinterest and Instagram for running mobile-first in-feed advertising. So let's get underway. And Adam, my first question comes to you, and I'm wondering if you can just first of all level set the audience on what mobile re-engagement is, and then give a state of the union. How is it today in terms of its adoption? What seems to be the sort of the 30,000-foot view?
Sure. So re-engagement really came about a few years ago when some app developers had grown an audience to several millions of users and realized 90% of those users don't tend to use their app more than once every 6 months. And so companies like Tap Commerce, ourselves, and others launched products to help these app developers be able to take the user back to the application that was being promoted to them and hopefully generate transactions within that application. So while I can't speak for the industry, I can speak for what we've done in re-engagement, and it might or might not mirror the industry, and you guys can jump in too if you want. But we launched our product a couple years ago. We started as a mobile user acquisition platform, so most of our technological resources have gone into that platform, but re-engagement was something our customers demanded, and we launched it. 2 years ago, if you'd asked me how much of our business I would have thought re-engagement would be today, I probably would have guessed half of our business would be re-engagement. Over the last couple years, it has surprised me how slow the re-engagement product has really grown. So again, I don't know if that's us and not delivering the best re-engagement product, but I don't think that's it. I think it's that the market is still really new, and a lot of app developers mostly still care about finding the customer, finding the new customer, because that pool is so large. And there are attribution problems that we'll probably discuss on this panel that make re-engagement quite difficult for the marketer to understand really what am I actually returning off the dollars I'm spending. And those are the problems we've seen within the product, and that's why we've continued to see the marketing managers push dollars to user acquisition and not towards re-engagement, at least thus far.
David, are you seeing the same thing in terms of just not quite meeting expectations?
So Criteo's core business is very much around retail travel classified, and we have hundreds, thousands of clients that have already had very positive experiences from desktop with re-engagement. So we saw actually a lot of those, particularly retail and travel, had very good experiences and high expectations. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work straight away. So even with those, they needed less selling to. It was far more consultative. So we had to educate them on the differences between desktop re-engagement and mobile, particularly apps. So we've spent a lot of time working with our clients, really trying to help them improve their apps. Trying to help them improve the user experience, and so some of them didn't even have a fully transactional app. Or some of them, the transaction was actually leaving app and going to mobile web, which is a terrible user experience. So this is some of the stuff that I'm sure you guys have experienced too. And slowly we're seeing clients, advertisers kind of improve the user experience. And then we see actually re-engagement then becomes far more relevant to them. So, I think it is far better than it was a year or two ago, but it's still got a long way to go. As long as they continue investing in improving the experience in their app and the conversion rate, they continue investing, actually driving user acquisition, then re-engagement is going to continue to grow.
So some growing pains today. Brian, I want to ask you, what you're seeing in terms of pockets of success. We've talked a little bit about the headwinds so far, but what have you seen that, from brands, customers, agencies that are doing things well?
Yeah, and again, I think it really varies across the spectrum, kind of, as Adam and David alluded to. I think a lot of clients that we talk to understand the value of retargeting, and to nod to Criteo, they, I think on the desktop side have helped prove out the power of kind of retargeting as a marketing platform. One of the biggest challenges, though, is just being able to get the proper data, make sure the app experience is in a place where it makes sense to bring users back, because clearly you don't want to spend money on paid media if you bring someone back to the app and they're not going to convert. It doesn't matter how good your retargeting platform is. And that's obviously where people like Tune come into play and have really helped, I think, accelerate this transition that at least we've seen. Tap Commerce has been strictly focused on building a mobile app retargeting platform, and so it's probably slightly different than Adam's experience. But yeah, I think there are some players that are still getting into the space, especially like traditional retail. We've seen a lot of them aren't even necessarily tracking yet. But the ones that have been doing it really well and kind of pioneers, have really pushed the envelope. We've been working with Groupon for a few years now. We've helped them do retargeting across 22 different countries. They have some really unique challenges where they have different offers in different cities, because a lot of it's really location-based. So they not only use behavioral data to help target different users, but dynamic creative to be able to match different creative for specific offers to specific users in different cities. And then once they click or engage with an ad, be able to deep link them into the app to really create a seamless user experience. We also work a lot with kind of mobile-specific companies. There's one that's actually, I believe, out here today, Ibotta. They're a Tune client that does, I think, a lot of interesting things. One, they take a lot of their in-app analytics data to really understand that customer lifecycle in the app, to really get a good sense of when should we be engaging customers and what type of messaging. Understanding it's a holistic approach, not just using retargeting platforms like you see up here on stage, but a combination of product, mobile email, as well as push messaging. And so being able to understand when to do that right, how to set up different segments, and then also tailoring creative to that. So obviously some of the more difficult segments to reach can be what is known as kind of lapsed users. I think Toon put out some data showing that after 6 weeks, roughly 80% of people aren't really using an app again. And those, as I'm sure Adam can attest to, people spend a lot of resources and time to bring in these users, and so it's really important to be able to re-engage them. And so rather than just showing them kind of traditional types of creative for retargeting that may be successful for other parts of the funnel, maybe giving them specific offers so they can get certain types of redemption or credit that you specifically target to users that haven't been responsive to other types of creative.
I think what you're touching on, too, is this notion that there's not a silver bullet, that the successful retargeting and re-engagement in mobile is not going to be a product of just, the most killer platform. You mentioned creative, you mentioned offers, you mentioned integrated marketing approach. And I'm wondering for those that, I think there's this notion that it works on desktop, right? And that people have had success on desktop, therefore the leap to mobile will come once the right connective tissue and processes are in place. Are there specific lessons from the desktop world that maybe mobile just hasn't quite picked up yet?
Yeah, and again, I think a lot of it depends on the data and some of the specific challenges. Obviously, in the app environment, it's very different than mobile web and desktop in the sense that tracking is completely different. It's not cookie-based, we use device IDs. So a lot of it is understanding the customers on mobile. How do they transact differently? And I think a lot of companies assume just in general, kind of in the early days, that a customer on mobile is going to be the same and perform in the same way as a customer on desktop and and other devices. And what they found that a lot of times it's very different. So I think it's really important to understand what are the differences of those customers, so you can create a marketing and in this case a retargeting campaign that makes sense for that platform.
Yeah. There's something Brian mentioned as well about relevant ads going to relevant pages. Now in desktop that's far easier. You've got URLs for a start. So in apps it's a completely new topic, but deep linking and working with your client early. Actually working with their developers on deep linking strategies. This is a new topic. And it's probably a challenge that all of us face. You try and launch a campaign. Sometimes we'll go and speak to a client that haven't even got deep linking configured. So they're interested in retargeting, but where does the click go? It goes to the App Store, and then it says open. That is not re-engagement. So we spend a lot of time with our clients, trying to understand. Well, first of all, get us the data we need to serve dynamic, relevant ads to the right user at the right time, which is half of it. But then, actually, when they click on that ad, it needs to go to that relevant page, which is the deep linking strategy. But all of us, I think, as an industry as a whole, need to try and create standards around that and work with the client early, so that when it actually gets submitted to store, it's all configured and it's working. Sometimes we've had some frustrating situations where it's submitted to store, deep linking's not working, and we're like, oh crap, can we do it again? And then they've got like a quarterly submit cycle. So it's an education piece, and even as competitors, partners, I think we should all be working together as an industry to make sure that those become standards, and then I think the whole piece will grow.
And just even so that we're not chronically setting up customers to chase their tails and be reactive.
Right, because
in the end, it's better for them too.
And that can add to a negative experience,
right.
And that is actually bad for re-engagement as a whole.
So, David, I want to stick with you on my next question, and it gets to understanding or having an eye on a particular performance threshold for mobile app install before maybe. Or at which point a customer would maybe be wise to say, you know what, I should be shifting some meaningful budget now to going after lapsed users. I've achieved, I don't know, is it 50 million downloads, 100 million downloads, and I'm seeing 30% of my download volume not engaging. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, this is a tough question because I'm sure your mileage may vary, but at what point should people start thinking about it?
It does vary hugely, and it's per client, per vertical. It always changes. But first of all, it's not just about lapsed users. I think there's a misconception that re-engagement is just about trying to bring people that have gone dead back to life. It's not. Some of the most effective campaigns is around active users. And then about thresholds. Well, it's relative. You can have one advertiser, that has maybe 1,000 downloads per week, and another advertiser that has 100,000 downloads per week. If they get return on ad spend, there shouldn't be a threshold. It may be different from us. For us guys, what becomes worth our while. But even at Criteo, we have a small and medium business team, which is our fastest growing market. So, we don't think there should be a threshold as long as there is positive ROI for the client. Then it's a campaign that we'd want to run. But I've also got another example. One of our biggest desktop clients in the retail space. They released an app. They actually ran lots of install campaigns with Twitter, with Facebook. It wasn't actually, the CPIs were too high, so they actually stopped driving installs. They had a good organic base, but what they actually found is that the most loyal users from desktop were using the app. So, they didn't have a huge install base, but all of their loyal users were using them. So, we still said, put our SDK in or work with Tune, get us the data. Because actually, data is fuel. It's what we need for our retargeting recommendation engine. So what we were able to do is actually take a lot of the data that's coming from app, and then we're actually then able to drive re-engagement, deep links to apps, but also to mobile web and to desktop, because we're actually able to track that user in a privacy-compliant way. So actually, so again, to reiterate my point, there shouldn't be a threshold. As long as there's usage and data, we want that data, and we can then drive return on investment across multiple channels.
So we've talked about some of these challenges. We've talked about the need to be proactive up front in the planning, even before an app publishes, to start thinking about building in the plumbing to support retargeting. We've talked about breaking and reforming habits that might have worked in the desktop environment and building them from scratch to support mobile. Adam, for you, what other challenges right now or headwinds are you seeing among customers that are holding back that growth relative to the expectation that you mentioned up front?
Yeah, so there are a couple other major challenges that need to be solved before I think retargeting becomes really relevant on mobile. One is an app uninstall problem that people don't realize how big a problem it is until you run a retargeting campaign and go, where'd half my clicks go? And the challenge with it is that about 50 to 60% of users will uninstall an app after time just to clean up their phone and make sure they have enough CPU and memory to download the next app. And the developer doesn't know about that uninstall. So they'll pass over lapsed users and want companies like ours to go retarget them. We send the click through, there's nowhere to go. It goes back to the App Store, and someone who chose to uninstall before gets a really bad experience. They see an ad for a product to go purchase, they now land in the App Store and they have to go download an app, start the session all over again, and nobody wants that user experience. So the alternative is push them to a mobile website, which we'll do in the case they no longer have the app on the device. But most of these companies and all the attribution partners on mobile today have really focused on app analytics, and mobile web analytics is still subpar compared to app analytics. So that click goes to mobile web, presumably will have a good experience. You would assume that retargeting is going to have success there, but there's no attribution, and so you end up with 50% of your clicks just disappearing into the abyss, which makes it a lot harder to figure out, okay, what was my true return on ad spend from that retargeting campaign? So I think the two major challenges we've seen are make sure that there's analytics in place across all channels, mobile, web, app, and then even that mobile click resolving to a user purchasing on desktop to really figure out the true ROI. And I think analytics has to get there, and it will over time. It's gotten better over the last couple of years. And hopefully the app stores over time will enable the developer to actually know who's uninstalled that app, so that as part of a lapsed user, companies like ours don't receive data that includes a bunch of uninstalls.
Yeah, this reminds me of conversations I was having with Peter 2 years ago around installs, about having consistent and transparent attribution methodologies for installs. Everyone was measuring installs differently, and the same thing's happening for reattribution. I think trying to have consistent reattribution methodologies that are transparent, so all advertisers, all networks, all platforms are doing the same thing, then the advertiser knows that it's the source of truth. Now, my view, because of my background, is that actually the source of truth should come from the third-party analytics provider. It should come from the tune, the AppsFlyers, the Javas, the older ADXs, and not necessarily from us. Now, probably 6, 12 months ago, there was kind of a debate about what reattribution should be and how that event is fired. Originally, we were measuring from a deep link launch event, which is actually the SDK. It would fire and tell us, one of your clicks landed. But then what we actually found out is that lots of the advertisers were poorly configuring that deep link launch event. So we were actually driving users, to the app, and they may, have then gone on to purchase, but we weren't actually getting credit for it. So one of the things that we've been doing is working with Tune and these other players. And I'm sure this is going to be benefiting us all. Is just having this consistent reattribution method, which is where us guys, we see a device ID on click, and then if there is a device ID that matches that on sale, yes, it should be deduped because they may be running with all of us guys, but similar to what we do in installs. There's a click on a device ID, and then there's an event. That is where the attribution should be. Now, the advertiser could say, well, is there some drop-off there? But I think it's more important to be consistent and transparent, because then you can measure one provider against the other, knowing that you're comparing apples to apples, as opposed to having all of these inconsistent attribution methodologies, which, again, it was exactly the same with installs 2, 3 years ago. So I think now that that is matured, advertisers will be able to measure and really prove return on ad spend.
So thinking about different types of advertisers and also then within different types of verticals, Brian, my next question goes to you, and that is just whether supported by data or anecdotal evidence, are there particular verticals that seem to lend themselves more naturally to successful mobile re-engagement?
Yeah, I mean, the vertical question is obviously an interesting one and I think very relevant. Another thing, the way we think about it is a lot of companies that have either been mobile first, or I should say kind of early adopters on the mobile side. David alluded a lot to on the user acquisition. A lot of them, were doing large user acquisition campaigns, 2, 3 years ago, and have now really begin to understand that the lifetime value of the user is really important. And have iterated on their product enough where they've gotten into a good point where stuff like retargeting is a big focus. And so we see a lot of big differences between kind of companies that are kind of more recently coming into the space versus kind of the early adopters. But then, those differences aside, across the different verticals, some of the main differences are, I think, KPIs or what goals that they're trying to drive. If you're in the gaming space, a lot of times it's just trying to drive a positive return on ad spend. I think on retail, a lot of times it's similar ROAS goals as well, but it may be tied to relevant metrics like basket size, margin. A lot of it comes down to specific company and what their business model is within that particular vertical. I think in the travel or OTA space, we see a lot of cost per booking goals. A lot of that can depend too on their mix of hotel versus flights. A lot of times for the OTAs, they get compensated differently there, and they're really focused on driving positive margin. And so, yeah, we see really kind of a variety across the board. The last thing I just kind of touch on is kind of traditional retail, which I think is really kind of making a push now into this space. And so, they've done a lot traditionally on desktop for retargeting, but I think on mobile, things like tracking and data and moving from a kind of web view to a native experience is something that they're now kind of pushing kind of more fully. So, that's where we're seeing a lot of interesting stuff.
I would imagine, to your point on the more traditional retail getting into this, that the ability to be able to track customers as they move from what may be an initial engagement or re-engagement on mobile to what may in fact be a desktop-based transaction is really, really important. What are some of the things in your mind that need to change or need to still evolve in the ecosystem for that level of sophistication and measurement to be possible?
Yeah, and I think David touched on this a little bit. Obviously, we're talking a lot about mobile here, and obviously a ton of time on mobile. 90% is spent in the app environment, but when we think back again, what I mentioned just about holistic marketing, it's really the customer life cycle across wherever you reach them, and for some of them, and additionally, you could say for traditional retail, in store. I think down the road, obviously being able to track customers, multiple different touch points, and then be able to re-engage them is really important. As we just heard recently, I think we're still evolving on the analytics side and being able to track and do that attribution in a way that marketers can, is really actionable for them. I think we're continuing to evolve there, but yeah, I think that's obviously where the space continues to head.
Yeah, I also think there's an element of that advertisers need to be working with partners that they trust. Cross-device is possible, but you need a persistent identifier across all of those devices. Right. Now, obviously, there are some players out there that can do that, the Facebook, the Googles of the world. We're able to do it. We have some secret sauce around, privacy-compliant ways to match device IDs to cookies, which is awesome, which means that we can do it. But one of the most effective and quick and easy ways to do it is actually an advertiser that has the confidence and the trust, in their partners to actually share CRM IDs or hashed email addresses, from when they actually log in. There was a privacy panel yesterday, and one of the questions or one of the concerns, even from the advertisers as well, is who do we share our data with? Every network out there, there's hundreds of them, are always saying, give us your device IDs. But I think advertisers need to approach with caution. Work with companies that they trust, that have got existing relationships with, that also have a proven track record in working in that industry and not cross-pollinating. And I think when that trust is there, then the right amount of data can be shared from cross-platform, and that's truly when we'll see re-engagement grow. Shouldn't just be about apps. It shouldn't just be about mobile web or desktop. And I think everything grows actually when we can treat it as a true kind of cross-channel opportunity.
You've set me up perfectly for the final question, and
Okay,
I'm gonna ask each one of you to share the one thing that you think will be most critical over the next 18 months to the growth of this business in mobile re-engagement. So, Brian, what's your one thing?
I think from what we've seen is really being on the tracking side and being able to get the right amount of data to one, share with partners or people you see on stage that enable us to go in and find users, because if we don't get things past like device IDs, we're not able to go out and find users in the mobile app environment in order to bring them back. But also, if they're not tracking and marketers aren't able to understand what is the ROI or LTV that's being driven by this, it's never going to be a sustainable channel, because at the end of the day, it's multiple different marketing sources that they're competing against. We obviously think from a mobile perspective, or at least in the topic of this panel, but clearly there's many different channels that they're looking to engage users across, and if they're not able to properly track and drive users on the mobile side, then it's just we find it's going to be hard for them over the long term to sustainably focus on stuff like retargeting.
Got it. Adam?
For me, it's really measurement around uplift. When we do user acquisition, attribution's pretty easy. Someone spends $20,000 with us, we know and they know the money that they're generating from the users they acquire, and they understand exactly when they break even on that $20,000 of spend. And if it comes within their goals, they'll spend as much money as they've gotten, as much money as we can spend within those goals. When it comes to retargeting, advertisers today spend for clicks, and there's attribution problems we've all discussed. And really the biggest challenge is understanding, would that user have actually purchased on their own, or did this incremental click really lead to that transaction? And today there's not really good methodology around uplift measurement on retargeting, and until there is, it's going to be hard for advertisers to open up the checkbook as much as they do on the user acquisition side.
Got it. David?
Sure. It's actually a very similar point to Adam, but I think it's worth reiterating, because it's only when you can really prove to the advertiser, or rather the advertiser can prove to their CMO and to their CFO that there is true incrementality from this campaign. They've spent $1 million on installs, now they want to spend $500,000 on re-engagement. They need to be able to prove it. Now, that shouldn't, although it's us guys that are driving those campaigns, I believe it should be the Tunes of the world, those platforms, those analytics providers, that are providing the tools and the software to prove that return on investment is there, and that is by creating a tool. It's not that hard. It's a new module. I've even been speaking to Peter about it to be able to create a control group. That no one is touching, that no re-engagement is touching, and then even other control groups that also allow bake-offs. Between the Tap Commerce and the Applovins and the Criteos of the world, so you can give them each individual buckets of device IDs to target. What that does, it allows the marketeer to prove that re-engagement, is an uplift. There is return on ad spend, but then it also allows them to prove which one of us three that is really driving, the best campaigns. So I think that is happening now, but it needs to happen across the board for all advertisers and all industries. And even that, that's when I think gaming is going to boom. We've kind of seen gaming now coming in. Because their CPIs are going up, so now they've become far more interested in re-engagement. But we need to give them those tools, that methodology, the software to prove it.
Outstanding. We've got 3 seconds.
Sorry, they're all hungover. They don't want to ask us questions anyway.
Unless I hear the gong ring. If there's a question in the audience, I'd like to be able to at least say that we took one. So are there any questions of any of our panelists on re-engagement?
I didn't think so.
You got one over there.
We got one.
All right, over here.
Hi. So one of the challenges that I anticipate as I try and do more re-engagement strategies is not just being compliant with like FCC and all those privacy channels, but I can just feel like my internal legal and privacy teams freaking out when they hear about things like passing through our CRM database or IDFAs and things like that. So what are you all doing to help marketers such as myself, speak to my legal and privacy teams in ways that they'll get comfortable with? Because this is all new to them.
That's a great question.
Yeah, Dave. I'll start, but I'll
go for it.
Because this is stuff that we address all of the time. Now, there isn't an industry body that kind of monitors us all on kind of individual campaigns and behavior. But so the way that we address it is really just looking at our past. I've met with many of the privacy people within our customers, and it's actually just giving references and case studies. We're a public company. We do get audited. We can't cross-pollinate data, and we've actually got 10 years of history where we've grown a very successful business where we haven't been doing that. In the travel space, we work with Priceline and Expedia. There is no way that we'd be able to, and we receive all that data from them. There is no way that we'd be doing anything that we shouldn't be doing and still have a successful, thriving business that we do today. I think it's about conversations, meeting in person. It's about transparency. It's when you have your chief privacy officer, your legal. I think if you're transparent, you show them the technology, how it works, how you keep that data, perhaps even your data deletion policies. Then over time, they become more comfortable. But also, it's important that you've got a sponsor in the marketing side of the business. They want this stuff to work. So you need a good sponsor to then set up the meetings with the privacy and the legal people.
So I'm sure all of us will be available for any questions during breaks later today, but please join me in thanking David, Adam, and Brian for their re-engagement expertise.